Good evening, everyone. Tonight's shiur is called Passover Insights, the secret to the Exodus. The Exodus is a miraculous occurrence in the history of the Jewish people. And together with this miraculous occurrence of freeing in an unprecedented manner a nation that was held captive and enslaved to the most powerful kingdom of the world at that time, it's just an impossibility. Something that was not dreamt of from the Jewish people's perspective. Certainly not of Paro. Paro never dreamt to let the people go, and Moshe Rabbeinu audaciously suggested, "Let my people go." Paro told him to go fly a kite. Told him where to go. In addition to this, all the great miracles that occurred. So the Exodus is a very powerful historical occurrence that, according to many, including the Kuzari, the famed Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, that wrote that the Exodus is the very backbone of our faith and the very backbone of our religion. So what is the secret to this Exodus? Let us go back and see the historical backdrop, the historical background to the Jewish people in exile, in slavery in Egypt. Historically, the Jewish people came because of Yosef, Yaakov, and the 12 tribes, and they settled in the land of Israel, and they settled in the land of Goshen, and they kept to themselves, and etc. But slowly, as the spiritual giants passed away, the corrupt society and culture of Egyptians began to seep in and change the mindset and the political correctness of the people. Whereas at first, when the Jewish people came, the Jewish tribe rather came, the 12 tribes came to Egypt, they said a very unpolitically correct statement that they were shepherds. And you have to understand that sheep in those days was one of the gods, the Ram, the gods of Egypt. A very unpolitically correct, improper statement to make at that time, but they said it because firstly, that's what they were, that's what they knew. They were shepherds, they tended the sheep. And secondly, the very quality of shepherds and sheep allows them for spiritual meditation. That is why our ancestors chose to be shepherds, because it allows them for spiritual development and sensitivity, because you have to be sensitive to the animals. As we know, the famous story in the Midrash that one of the reasons why Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen as the leader of the Jewish people because he cared for one sheep, one young little sheep that went astray, and he went and he cared and he tended this one sheep. So despite the fact that this was the deity and the god of Egypt, they did not shy away from saying, look, this is what we are, this is who we are, this is our identity, we are shepherds, and this allowed them for a measure of an isolation to keep to themselves. But slowly with time, when these spiritual giants passed away, the fiber of the spiritual qualities of the Jewish people also began to erode. As you can very well imagine, that you are a tiniest of minority, you begin to adopt and adapt to the culture of the place. It is no different from the Jews in America. It is no different from the Jews here in Australia. Where we see today, society at large is becoming a godless, permissive society, that everything becomes permissible and explained away. Anything that suits us and serves our hedonistic desires, anything that is inconvenient for us, we will explain it away, and we will do away with basic morals that our ancestors, that our even our fathers and grandfathers took for granted. It's unfortunate, but that's what happens, and we begin to adopt that mentality, especially when they're very vociferous, where those who campaign, whatever it is that they campaign, do not allow you to voice your opinion and have an opinion. And God forbid, if you do have an opinion and you voice that opinion, you are considered to be anti this and anti that, etc. There was a famous, I think you can, not sure whether you can see it on YouTube, but there was a famous experiment made where they had in the room a lecturer, and they had in the room people who were invited to this particular lecture, and it was a secret experiment. And in this lecture hall, there were people who were planned there. And basically the lecturer would say something that is totally incredulous, something that is totally bizarre or false, like this table is white when it's really brown. And hands up all those people who think that this table is white. And all of a sudden the majority of people would lift up their hand and say it's white. Hands up all those people who think that this table is brown. And a minority of people, those people who were the invited people who didn't know about it, raised up their hands, but they were like very self-conscious of it. And all the people who voted that it's white, which was not true, looked at them like incredulously, like looked at them like they're off their head. And then again he would say, make such another experiment and say something totally false. And again they would say, raise up your hands, and they would raise up their hands, and then again those people would raise up their hand, and it began to be less and less. And it began to be very few who dared even lift up their hands, even though that they knew that not to be true, not to be the case. They were just intimidated. Unfortunately, that happens in every society. It's certainly happening here, certainly already long gone happening in America, where it's becoming difficult for people to hang on to their morals because it is not fashionable anymore. And not only is it not fashionable, but if you do hang on to those morals, you are archaic, you are ancient, and you are no longer a decent person. And that's very unfortunate. Gone is free speech. Gone is freedom of religion. Even though we, so to speak, of course you have free speech. Of course there's freedom of religion. But that is not the case, unfortunately. We see it around us, so you can well understand that if you go back in Egypt and you are a minority of a minority of a minority, and all of the people are behaving in a particular way and believe in particular beliefs and don't believe in monotheism, don't believe in the one God, you can well imagine that this began to erode the fiber of faith and belief of the Jewish people at that time. And the Jewish people at that time began to sink into the abyss of impurity, slowly distancing themselves from their morals, the teachings of their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and slowly sinking into the mire and the mud of impurity until they reached the lowest, almost the lowest rung. They reached the 49th level of impurity. The Holy Arizal teaches us that when a person does a particular sin many times, he begins to lose his divine image. And it becomes difficult for him to overpower that particular desire, temptational sin. And he loses a certain degree of his spirituality, and you become desensitized to spirituality. And this is what happened with the Jewish people. It's almost like they almost like lost their identity as Jews. And all of a sudden there's an exodus. And all of a sudden God says, I've heard the cry and the suffering of my people. And he calls Moshe Rabbeinu to be the Redeemer, and he sends him to Egypt, and you know the rest of the story. And he finally redeems the Jewish people. By which merit? Here you have people who were sunken in the 49th level of impurity. By which level could they be redeemed? And not only could they be redeemed, but 49 short days after the Exodus themselves, they slowly plateaued and reached a level of the 49 levels of spirituality, to the extent that on the 50th day they merited to receive the Torah. The divine revelation, an unprecedented revelation, an unprecedented covenant and bond with God that sustains us till this very day. How is that possible? All they had is one level left, one station left. That's all they had. With one station, with one level, they were able to receive the merit for redemption, for the Exodus. And not only that, climb out, extricate themselves from the mire and the mud of the 49 levels of impurity. They were almost lost. It's like a person who's like in one of those rivers. What do you call those rivers that are raging rivers? And he's there floating around in that river, and he's got the tiniest of little strings, and you're trying to tug him out with that string. It's impossible. Can you imagine this a rope that had the 50 strands, knots and strands, and slowly each one began to be ripped because of the rock you're pulling, and the rock was chaffing away, was cutting away, and each time another one of the strings is gone and gone and gone, and the whole rope is becoming so weak that only is one strand left. Can you imagine the impossibility of pulling that person out that weighs so much more than that one strand? How can you pull him out? It's impossible. That's what it seems like over here. How can you possibly extricate? How can you possibly pull out with one little tiny strand, pull out the Jewish people from this quicksand, from the impurity of Egypt, which there was almost indiscernible as a nation amongst other nations? How is it possible? It must be that one remaining rung, one remaining strand is so powerful that was able to not only secure them the Exodus, but enable them and allow them the ability to climb up to the 49th level and to receive the Torah. Must be something so powerful, so compelling, so strong, that could rebuild and fill all the holes. A light that is so powerful that banished away, one light, banished away 49 levels of impurity, 49 levels of deep darkness. What is this one wrong? What is its power and its merit? Before we answer that question, I'd like to ask some other questions that will all be tied in, I hope, very nicely. We begin the Haggadah. The Haggadah is one of the most important mitzvot of the night of the Seder. Drinking the 4 cups of wine, eating the maror. 4 cups of wine is the 4 expressions of salvation. Wine represents joy. V'yain yasamach levav enosh, David HaMelech, King David says. And wine gladdens the heart of men. So we take wine, kosi she'ot esav v'shem Hashem ekra. We uplift up a cup of salvation, and we call upon the name of God. So the 4 cups define and symbolize 4 expressions of redemption used in the Bible for the Jewish people being redeemed and taken out of Egypt. The matzot, the maror, the bitter herbs to remind us of the bitterness of Egypt, the matzah to remind us of redemption, and the Haggadah. The Haggadah is telling the story of Egypt, the miracles, telling over the miracles and the story of Egypt. So there's a few questions I want to ask about the structure of the night. One of them is the very opening of the Haggadah is Helach Ma'anya. We say this is the bread of affliction. The Achalu Avatana Be'ara'ah de Mitzrayim, that our forefathers ate in Egypt. This is the bread of affliction. Here we find the famed paradox, where the matzah is, on the one hand, the symbol, the bread and the symbol of redemption, because the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, they didn't have time to tarry and delay, and they took their dough with them, and as the dough moved along with them, as long as you manipulate dough, it doesn't become hametz. As long as you knead dough, it doesn't become hametz. Only when you let it sit does it rise and become hametz. So they weren't prepared. And when they finally were able to bake that dough became matzah rather than hametz. And as a symbol of that freedom, the fact that they didn't tarry, God did not want to allow them to stay in Egypt one moment longer, lest they descend to the 50th level and rung of impurity, in the merit of the fact that God came and redeemed them and expressed their love to them, and there was no time for the dough to rise, and they baked matzah. That's a symbol of our freedom, of our exodus. Yet it is also the bread of affliction, we call it. And we commence the Haggadah by saying, Hey Lahmania, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. So make up your mind, is the matzah the bread of affliction? Is the matzah a bread that symbolizes slavery? Or is the matzah a bread that symbolizes redemption and exodus? The answer to that question, it's both. And we're not going to concentrate tonight on the paradox of the matzah and its symbolism. We have done so on other occasions and different articles that we've written about it. But why do we commence the Haggadah by saying this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt? Why did God command the Jewish people to eat matzah in Egypt? When we commemorate the matzah, the Exodus, we commemorate the matzah. The matzah that we eat it because it's a symbol of redemption. Because our ancestors left Egypt. Why do we then begin the Haggadah by saying and commemorating this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt whilst they were still in Egypt? What's the meaning of that? Why do we say that? Why do we commence the Haggadah with it? And furthermore, why indeed did God command the Jewish people when He commanded them to eat the Paschal lamb on the eve of the redemption? He commanded them to eat it al matzot. Umrorim yochluhu, you shall eat it with matzah and maror. You shall eat it with matzah and the bitter herbs. Why did God command? I understand the Paschal lamb, we will discuss it in a minute. I understand the Paschal lamb, its significance, its symbolism. We will discuss it in a minute. But why eat matzah? The matzah only is an outcome, is an outgrowth by which God revealed Himself, and we went out of Egypt and we took the dough with us. The dough could not rise, and that's why we eat the matzah. Why are we commemorating matzah that our ancestors ate in Egypt, and why did God command us to eat matzah in Egypt? So that's an interesting question that I'd like to address. Another interesting thing, which is an answer to one of the questions of the wise son asked questions. We know that there are symbolically 4 questions that correspond to the 4 different sons, or the 4 different verses that the Torah speaks about how to address our children or how to answer our children. And each one of them, so to speak, symbolizes a different child coming from a different perspective, and we must have an answer to each one of them, address them, and find a way to enter their heart. One of them is the wise son. And he asks questions, wise questions. And we answer them very simple. En maftirin ahara pesach hafikoman. After we eat the Paschal lamb, and together with the Paschal lamb we eat matzah, we no longer eat anything. That's how we finish the Haggadah. That's how we finish the Exodus. In the time of Exodus, that's what they ate, and that's how they finished their meal. And to commemorate that, we don't eat. We only eat forevermore. After the afikoman, we don't eat anything. The flavor of the matzah must remain in our mouth. How is that a good and conclusive answer to the wise son? And what is the significance of that we're not permitted to eat anything else? Why can't we have a nice dessert after the fikoman? Some chocolates, some egozim, tea with what do you call it? With dates. Tea with dates, nice. And an almond inside, even better, beautiful. You can't. Another question. We know that it says in the Haggadah, "Va'afilu kulanu hachamim, kulanu nevunim, kulanu yadim et haTorah." Even if we are all wise, even if we are all insightful, Even if we know the whole Torah, mitzvah lenu lesaper b'tziat Mitzrayim, it is a mitzvah on this night of the Seder to speak about the Haggadah, to speak about the miracles, to speak about the Exodus, about the going of Egypt. Surely a wise man can study Kabbalah on that night, the mysteries and the mysticism of godliness and the revelation of God and the unification of God in the world and the beautiful mysteries that we can study in Kabbalah that excites us. Why should we continually go on and on and on and speak about the same story we've spoken about last night? And not only that, whoever speaks about it extensively, this is very meritorious. Meshubah, it's very good. Praiseworthy, such a person. If you're big Talmid Hacham, if you're a tzaddik, you know all of this stuff. What do you need to go over it again? It's a simple story. The Haggadah narrative is simple. It's got a lot of beautiful symbolism, but in its most plain meaning, it's very simple. Everybody can understand it. Everybody can appreciate it. Everybody can follow along nicely. It's a simple story that could be said in a very short period of time. Yet even if you're the greatest scholar of Israel, as we find recited within the Haggadah itself, it says, in regards to the Haggadah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Tafon, Hayim Subim b'Bnei Brak. These great leaders, the greatest leaders of Israel, were sitting in the city of Rabbi Akiva, where he was the chief rabbi. And they were speaking about this story of Exodus the whole night. Now in my house, I like to say the Haggadah, and I like to speak about the commentary, and etc., etc. Not every visitor and every guest likes it, but that's how I do it in my house. And even then, how long does it take already? And every year I try to say new insights and new novel ideas that we didn't discuss last year. And my children give their own ideas and insights on what they remember, and some old things as well to remind them, because the lessons are powerful and important. But already, how long does it take already? And after you eat afikoman, it's like downhill from there. Yet these sages, these scholars of Israel, all night that were speaking about the story of the Exodus that is seemingly so simple. What's there to talk about all night? They could have spoken about Kabbalistic secrets. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yeshua. Giants. So that's important. And in reference to this, Kol Amarbeh, the more you do, the merrier, the greater it is, which means it's like every mitzvah has a limit. You blow the shofar, the Torah tells you have to blow the shofar a certain amount. The Hachamim tell us exactly how much to blow the shofar. That's it, you fulfill the mitzvah. You don't go on and blow all day, and blow 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 because you want to fulfill the mitzvah all day long. That's it. There's a limit. Every mitzvah has its many mitzvot have its limitations. Certain mitzvot do not have limitations. Lulav, you make the bracha, the lulav, the etrog, you fulfill the mitzvah. You don't go all day shaking the lulav and etrog and holding on to it the whole day. I mean, it's beautiful if you do, but you don't have to. And here it seems, kol amarbeh, the more that it is, the more meritorious, the greater it is. But surely every mitzvah has a limit, or the majority of mitzvot have limitations. Have a limitation. The 4 cups of wine doesn't say drink 5 cups. You drink 5 cups. You haven't done anything special. All you got to drink is 4 cups. You drink 7 cups. You didn't do any mitzvah. All you're going to do is you're going to be late to synagogue tomorrow. And you're going to tell the rabbi an excuse. The excuse is, I wanted to fulfill the mitzvah so great that I drank 10 cups of wine. Matzah has a measurement. You ate the measurement, you fulfill it. Now, even though we know that the matzah has great symbolism and has great healing and spiritual properties, and it's a very great, I on Pesach try and eat as much matzah as I can because it has very great spiritual power, as we will discuss in a minute. So I try and eat, but even that has a limit. And here the telling over the story of Exodus seems to have no limit whatsoever. So what's going on here? The sages tell us that we have 613 commandments. Not all of them are applicable to every single one of us. Not all of them are applicable in every land, in every time, and in every place, and in every country. Some to the Bet HaMikdash, some to Leviim, some to Kohanim, some only if you're not in exile, some if you're only on land, some only on the sabbatical, some on Shabbat, some on the festival, etc., etc. Some to males, some to females. Ba Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, Vehimidam alahat, and told us that there's an undeniable principle behind all of the Torah and all of the mitzvot, and that is Tzaddik ve'emunato yihyeh. Atikre yihyeh ela yahayeh. Emunah, belief in God. This is the anchor of all of Judaism, of all of the mitzvot. And that is the secret ingredient, and that 49th, that 50th rung, that is the deepest of the deepest that lies within the soul and the heart of a Jew. And it is that rung which is so powerful, and that light which is so blinding, that could remove and banish all the 49 rungs of impurity. As Habakkuk says, the prophet Habakkuk, that one mitzvah of faith in God is able to enliven, to massage, to bring to life all the other mitzvot, where perhaps where we have been weak in all of the other mitzvot, perhaps where we have not been as cautious and careful with all the other mitzvot, comes Emunah and breathes life to all of the mitzvot. And this is the secret ingredient of Exodus. Why is that? Because Emunah is not a mishanet. It's not a crutch. It is in fact accessing the soul. It's not accessing your intellect, your mind, and understanding godliness. Because as smart as you are, and the great scholar that you may be, that has a limitation. You may be the greatest of scholars of Israel. That has a limitation. Because mind, brain, body, time, place is limited. But the soul is Helek Elokai, is a part of God. It is unlimited. And its antenna, which is faith, is unlimited. And therefore, when you sit and speak about the story of Exodus, which is really the principle and the anchor of Judaism, which is our faith, there's no limit to it. Because we're not talking about wisdom. We're not talking about knowledge here. We're talking about faith. And faith comes from the soul. And that is a clarity of knowing God and seeing God, so to speak. And that has no limitation. That has levels upon levels upon levels upon levels, as high and as great as your soul, as high and as great and as deep as you can access the soul. And that is that 50th rung which the Jewish people were able to access, that is immutable. That is like the Yehidah Shebenefesh. That is like the very essence and core of who we are, our very core, our intrinsic identity, very etzem of who we are. Reveal that, you can overpower all the obstacles. You can overpower all the 49 rungs. And that power comes directly from the soul, not from the intellect, from the soul. It's beyond intellect. It's beyond the limitations of intellect. It's greater than intellect. And so therefore, when the sages of Israel were sitting, they weren't philosophizing. They were developing emunah in faith. And that has no limit. Whoever speaks more and more about it, it's praiseworthy. It is unlimited. Because that is accessing the soul. That is transcending the body. That is transcending the mind. The limitations of mind. Because mind has a limitation as great as it is. Has a limitation. You transcend all of that. And there you reach and enter a level of unlimitedness. That is the point of unlimitedness that we all contain and have within us. And that is immutable. And that is why, that is that secret ingredient by which we merited Exodus. That is that secret ingredient by which we're able to overcome and overpower and allow us to then quickly, within 49 days, to climb up that ladder again of spirituality, reach such a plateau and a peak that we were deserving of receiving the Torah in such a quick span. Like Habakkuk said, that one mitzvah, the mitzvah of faith in God, enlivens, enriches, and breathes life and passion and fire into all the other mitzvot. Where we may have been neglectful, where it may have been dead, so to speak. And that is how you answer the wise son. The wise son wants to know, what's this service exactly? What is it that we are doing? What is it that we are achieving? We answer him not philosophically. We tell him, first of all, we tell him all the laws. We tell him all the statutes. But we tell him that bottom line, we eat the matzah. And the matzah is a symbol of faith of the Jewish people. And that matzah has no ego, has no flavor to it. Matzah has no flavor. It's not like the 7-grain bread that you buy from the baker, or the rye bread, the beautiful New York rye bread, what do they call it? The pastrami on rye. Beautiful. Or the sourdough, or the French baguette. Each one of them, or the Turkish bread, or the Iraqi pita, unbelievable. Each one of them has a beautiful, distinct flavor. Beautiful. Matzah has no flavor. It's like cardboard. No ta'am. No ta'am. Ta'am in Hebrew means reason. It means flavor, taste, but it also means reason. The matzah is beyond reason, because it symbolizes faith, and faith is beyond reason. And that is what the bottom line of what the Haggadah and what Pesach is all about. Why we merit it in the first place. We tell the wise son, you think you're smart. Let me tell you something. There's something greater than your wisdom, greater than your smarts. It is faith that comes from the soul. And that is what the Exodus is all about. So as wise as they may have been in Egypt, they would not have merited the Exodus if it was for their wisdom. It wasn't because of their wisdom, it was because of their deep ingredient, that light that shines forth from the essence of our soul, and that is faith. We know that the impurity of Egypt was kfirah. Kfirah in English, translated in English, is to denial of God, denial of God's power, denial of Ashgaha Pratit, of divine providence. Paro, the very word paro, has the same letters as ha'oref. Ha'oref means to the back of the neck. You turn your back on someone. Turn your back, pretend they don't exist. When you turn your back on someone, it's the rudest thing that you can do. Someone's talking to you, you turn their back on them, it's the rudest thing that you can do. It's like you're saying, you don't exist for me, I'm cutting you out. You don't exist. Paro, the word paro means ha'oref, which means cutting God out, turning my back on God. Now you can turn your back as much as you want on me, but I'm still here. Turn your back, I'm still here. You can turn your back on God as much as you want. It doesn't deny the fact that God is here. But you can live your life denying, you can live your life turning your back on God. And that was Paro. Mi Hashem asher eshma. Who is God that I shall listen to? Who's this God? What's this God? And thus Mitzrayim, which means Metzarim, spells the same word as Metzarim, which means limitations, means that as long as we limit ourselves, the more limitations there are, the more Mitzrayim there is, the more Egypt there is in our lives, the less emunah there is, the less faith in God. The more emunah that we reveal in our lives, the more we transcend all of the limitations of the world and the difficulties and the problems that we have and the things that seem to be bothering us and where is it coming from and why is it happening and all of the whys. The more we banish the whys and the questions and the doubts and we accept the will of God and we run and flow with God and we place our trust and faith and belief in God, the less limitations we have. I told you once, Kaveh El Hashem, Hazak ve'ames libecha v'kaveh El Hashem. Every day we say, Kaveh El Hashem. Trust and hope to God. Hazak ve'ametz libecha, strengthen and fortify your heart. V'kavel Hashem, and hope to Hashem. Why does it say twice? Hope in Hashem, strengthen and fortify your heart, and hope in Hashem. Because, as we've said many a times, whenever you begin to climb the spiritual ladder, you will always find opposition. You want to do something good, there will be opposition. Always. So you have to fortify yourself. You want to believe, you want to find faith and transcend yourself. You want to overcome the limitations, and all of a sudden, 10 limitations come upon you. I mean, we don't have the time to develop this, but Abraham Avinu had 10 tests. We all go through these 10 tests in our lives in different ways and formats. And the 10 plagues correspond to those 10 the 10 revelations of the 10 plagues correspond to the 10 trials and tribulations that we go through in life. And these 10s are not necessarily, one at a time per se, or, one day in our lives. They sometimes could span months or years. We have to go through and travel and traverse through them and find clarity and belief and faith in God. So we try to transcend our limitations, our mitzrayim, our metzarim, our boundaries, our strengths, our difficulties. And all of a sudden they double upon us. And there's a cloud of uncertainty and a cloud of darkness descends upon us, and we lose a bit of our faith. Then we say again, "V'hazak ve'ametz libecha," strengthen and fortify your heart. V'kavel Hashem, and then you will find a deeper level of faith, much deeper. And I shared with you once, and I'll share it again because it's a powerful lesson for me. That one time I was going through a difficulty, and I prayed to Hashem. I prayed to Hashem very strongly that the problem will be solved. And the problem wasn't solved. And I prayed to Hashem. And I fortified my heart, and I strengthened my heart, and I prayed to Hashem more. And then all of a sudden, that problem didn't bother me anymore. I didn't care. Hashem, I know you brought it upon me. And I know it's yours. And you brought it lovingly, I accepted lovingly. And it didn't bother me anymore. Didn't bother me anymore. Which means that sometimes a particular problem or a strait or a difficulty or a limitation comes upon us simply just to fortify ourselves more, to find a deeper level of faith in Hashem. Transcend yourself a little bit. Go above and beyond. Because that power that lies within us is so powerful. That one strand is so powerful that it can overcome all the other 49 levels of impurity, or 49 failings that we failed. Comes along that faith, that emunah in God, and blinds away and blasts away that darkness. And therefore, this was the whole impurity and the culture and the philosophy of Egypt, denying God. It's so difficult to live in such an environment where everybody's telling you God doesn't exist. He doesn't care for you. Do what you need, do what you want, do what pleases you. Pull whatever strings you need to get through in life. Because that's how you're going to succeed. So it's very difficult. But the more you sink into that mentality, the less that light of clarity and the presence of godliness in our lives is evident. The more you get rid of it, the more faith that you had, the more you get rid of it. Let me give you a classic example of this concept repeated to us every day. The sages, the Torah says that we must recite the reciting of the Shema, the passage of the unity of God every day, morning at night. Morning, the symbol of clarity. Morning, the symbol of knowledge, of kindness, of things that is going right, and everything seems to be good. Thank Hashem. Acknowledge Hashem. Acknowledge the unity of God in your life. And at night time as well, we must also, the night times is a symbol of exile, of difficulty, of lack of clarity. There too you must find the unity of God. That's why we're obligated to recite the Shema both in the day and in the night. But what's interesting is the sages added another passage to the reciting of the Shema. We've got the Shema itself, and then Ve'ahavta and Ve'haya, which are very similar. Ve'ahavta, you should love the Lord your God and accept upon yourself the mitzvot. And the Ve'haya is very similar to it. Similar words. So it's natural that those two are grouped together with the Shema. But why did the sages throw in Vayomer Hashem tzitzit, the parasha of tzitzit? The parasha, the portion that teaches us to wear tzitzit, and you should look upon them, and you shall remember the mitzvot of Hashem. So you can say, well, there's a connection there. You look at the mitzvot look at mitzvah of tzitzit, it reminds you of the mitzvot, and that's similar to the other ones. But what about nighttime, when we're not obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzit, because nighttime is not a time of seeing, it's not a time of when you look upon the tzitzit. The sage says, no, still say the Shema. Still say that third paragraph. You know why? Because what is the end? I am the Lord your God who has taken you out of Egypt. That one verse, that one powerful verse, is deserving of allowing that whole passage to be included in the recitation of the unification of God, even at night time. What's the connection? The connection is, the more there is, the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the more in our lives that God, the Lord is my God, the Lord is one, the more there is, I am the Lord, the God has taken you out of Egypt, taken you out of the limitations, taken you out of the 49 rungs of impurity. You understand the correlation? The first verse and the last verse are correlated. The more of the first verse, the less of the last verse, so to speak, or the more the last verse is realized as well. In other words, when we understand and we apply in our lives, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, hear, O Israel, the Lord is my God. Real and relevant to me. The Lord is one, meaning to say that there is only one unity, oneness in the world, and that is all incorporated in God's existence. The more we appreciate, the more we believe that, the more we develop that, the more we see it in our lives, the more we experience the going out of Egypt. Do you understand? The more we experience the going out of Egypt. Therefore, when the sages sat, they didn't come and just say big hidushim, novel interpretations of the halakha. What would be if a little bit of hametz fell in the pot of matzah and this and that? They came to speak about faith. They came to speak about going out of Egypt. It's an experience. And the more you speak about it, and the more you develop it, the more you experience it, the more you feel it in your life. It is the birth of our nationhood. The more you experience it, the more you're part of that nation and the destiny of the nation of Israel. That's why it's so important, the Haggadah, and to tell over the Haggadah with feeling and with passion. And as much as you possibly can, and as much as your guests will allow you to, before they throw the marori. You know it who. There's a correlation. And that's why Hareze Meshubah. That's why it is exemplary to speak about it. Because we're not speaking about a story. And we're not speaking about wisdom and knowledge. We are talking about opening up the gates that limit and are covering and concealing our faith in God. Because once that's open, there is clarity. There is vision. And that is unlimited. Because it comes from the soul. It's a power and the antenna of the soul. Belief is a power and the antenna of the soul, and that is bli gvul, unlimited. And that is what we want to impress upon the wise son. Your wisdom is great. You got to study Torah. You got to know Torah. You got to understand Torah. But bottom line, it is the matzah that is the symbol of our faith. And that is why they ate matzah. God commanded them to eat matzah before going out of Egypt. Again, why do we eat matzah? Mishum shelo yispik betzikam shel avotenu leachmitz. What's the reason we tell our children? What's the reason the Torah tells us that we eat matzah? It's a symbol of our freedom on Pesach, because the bread did not rise, the dough did not rise. It shows our haste. It shows our following God no matter what, which we'll get to later on. It shows our faith in God. So why did God command us to eat matzah before in Egypt? Because it is the symbol and the ingredient of lamala mitam, higher than flavor, higher than taste. Matzah is deflated. There's no ego here. There's no self. It's a symbol of transcendence. To transcend your limitations, to go beyond your limitations, above. Open them all the gates. All the things that we inhibit, we cover over. Our natural faith and belief in God. So God said, eat this bread. Eat this. This is the bread that our ancestors ate in Egypt. They ate it because it was a symbol of faith. And that was a secret ingredient that allowed them to leave in Egypt in the first place. That's why we commemorate both the matzah that they ate in Egypt and after Egypt. Because without the matzah before Egypt, before Exodus of Egypt, there wouldn't have been an Exodus. There wouldn't have been a matzah after Egypt. So the matzah beforehand was the faith that they believed in God. God commanded them to take the Paschal lamb. And with the Paschal lamb, which we will discuss at length, God commanded them to eat matzot. And this matzah is a bread that has no flavor, has no ego, doesn't rise. It is a matzah. What's the difference between hametz and matzah? What's the difference between hametz and matzah?
One rise, their own flesh. Fermentation.
The difference is as follows.
Myself.
One is left. One is left to rise. You leave it. You don't touch it. One is continually kneaded. You're kneading the dough. You're kneading it. You're kneading it. As long as you're kneading it, it's not going to rise. It's not going to ferment. It's not going to become hametz. You're kneading it. Someone's in control here, isn't they? Aren't they? Matzah represents someone's in control. Hametz represents the belief that there is no one in control. You let things happen on their own, let it go on their own course. And that was the impurity of Egypt. Hametz, the symbol of things happening on their own, rising on their own, happening on their own. The lack of belief, the denial of the existence of God. The denial. You like that one? Denial, Riva? Got it? It's too late now. Have you a chance? The denial of God. And therefore the matzah is a symbol of faith. It shows that we believe that there's someone always massaging history, controlling, kneading, moving. And that imbues us with humility and nullification before God. For without nullification of God and removing the ego, there cannot be true belief in God. There cannot be true unity with God. Yes?
About the chametz, you said it grows. And basically, you leave things to happen in a way. Isn't that also fake?
No, because over here it is a mentality thing. The mentality thing is that everything is fate, happens on its own. Nobody governs, nobody controls. It's a denial of that there is a controller here. And thus it rises because it's a symbol of ego. And it has a flavor and a texture to it, bread. Whereas here, the whole concept of faith is lemala mitam v'dat. You know what lemala mitam v'dat is? Higher than knowledge, higher than reason. Not because it cannot be explained. Not because I believe just because I believe. It's because it comes from the soul. The soul is spiritual. It's beyond the mind. I cannot quantify it with my mind. I cannot take a cup and put 1 billion liters, infinity amount of liters in a cup of 200 mils. I cannot. Not that, it's just impossible. I can't quantify faith. I can't quantify I can't measure the soul. I can't measure infinity. And that's what the Gemara says, En ani ela b'da'at. Ani, someone who's impoverished, is really someone in the da'at, in the level of da'at. Which means, da'at in Hebrew means itkashrut, becoming one. V'adam yada it haba. One of the expressions of intimacy in the Bible is yada. Doesn't say, and man was intimate with Hava and they bore children. It says, man knew Hava, which goes a lot to the whole approach of what intimacy in Judaism is. To be one, to know one's spouse, to be one with one's spouse. Not that the act of intimacy is a separate act, but it has to be one that brings close and makes one. Therefore, the concept of da'at, of knowledge, is when you become one with what you know. David HaMelech says to Shlomo HaMelech, V'ata Shlomo beni da' et Elokei avicha. Know the God of your father. Know means to become one with him. And the sages tell us that a baby does not know how to call father or properly recognize his father or his mother as long as they don't taste bread. Bread has a particular quality to imbue us with that, with a recognition of our Father in heaven. And that bread particularly is the bread of matzah. Because over here we're not talking about just knowledge and knowing God, which we're certainly obligated to do. We're obligated to know God and understand as humanly possible. But that's just the beginning. That's not the all and be all. That's just the beginning. We have the power to reach a higher level of recognition of godliness and oneness with godliness that emanates from the soul, not from the mind, from the soul. And that is belief. That is belief. And that was the secret ingredient to our ancestors leaving Egypt. And that's why we commemorate at the very beginning of the Haggadah, we say, Ha-lahmania, this is the bread that our ancestors ate in Egypt, which imbued them with the ability or recognition or oneness with Abba, with our Father in heaven. Now, unfortunately, we ran out of time, but next week we've got very interesting concepts to discuss, where the Holy Arizal writes that the exile and exodus was a tikkun, was a rectification of the sin of the flood and the sin of the generation of the flood, the generation of the Haflaga, the Tower of Babel, which caused a division in the world in language and division amongst people, which they wanted to egotistically make a name for themselves, commemorate themselves, make a name for themselves. And also the generation of Enosh, which introduced idol worship to the world. I want to speak about that, and I want to speak about the concept of the Paschal Lamb. I want to speak about the Exodus itself, when the Jewish people left Exodus, and a couple of other things, and how that will tie into the first things that we discussed tonight. So we'll continue that next week by the grace of God. Are there any questions?